So hi everyone, this is a meeting of the ISCET survey working group. So we're going to be discussing progress with the manuscript reporting the results of the survey on international eye tracker use. So if we just quickly go over the actions that we agreed from the last meeting. So we had an action to start a description of how we handled all of the data. And I think that's complete, really. I think that is now a live document that's being added to and edited, but I think that's essentially complete. There was an action to continue the work on the results, and that was Daniel, Matt and Fiona. And it says once that was complete, this will require a final check of the results coding, and that Fiona was going to arrange that by email. So I assume that's kind of part of the discussion today, Matt.
Yeah. So we have continued to go through. I think we've now settled on all the categories, coded the categories, and I've just seen because there's a newer version I've just received, and there are a few other queries in this. I think it's really just between myself, Fiona, and Daniel.
Okay, so
and at that point, I think there was an email from Fiona just saying that she was going to start generating some graphs, but I don't know whether that's begun at this stage.
Okay, do you think you will still need a volunteer to kind of final check the coding, or do you feel like the three of you have kind of checked everything between yourselves?
I feel like we've checked it between the three of us, because if there's ever been a discrepancy, then the third person would be coming in to check that. And there is a little bit more of that to do where we've added categories between us. I don't know what we said before, though. If we did say that we were going to bring in a fourth person, then we can do that. I don't want to, go back on a previous decision that was made.
Yeah, I think we said, I think it was Siwan who wanted to have a look.
Okay. Yes, of course.
But we had, because the wording was still very undecipherable from outside our little group. I haven't sent it yet to anyone else. Also, I just responded to the different comments you had in there, Matt.
Yeah,
I've just been late. I'm sorry for that. The start of term has been absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
I think we're ready to share it now. Pretty much.
Yeah.
There were just a couple of unresolved comments and they were mostly about where you had collated another question, so where we had found a fourth repeat.
Yeah.
And that Daniel should just confirm that is the same question.
Yeah, I've just opened that document you sent, Fiona, just before this meeting. So I've just begun to go through and respond to your comments and make changes as we remove those comments, and then I'll fire it back to you two. And then I think we are pretty much done. Otherwise we can keep in circles.
Yeah, but I think if
Siwan
is willing to take a look, that could be great.
Yeah.
But otherwise.
And then if we could identify during this meeting the list of questions that we're going to be asked to produce, producing graphs, then I'm happy to produce some of those as well. I can't remember if we said we were going to kind of produce them independently and make sure that they were in agreement. Either way, but I'm able to do that. So.
Okay, well, I'm ready to go with graphs. I've set up the data and so on. Brilliant. But it's just to know which graphs we would like. Like, for example, I think it could be interesting, just the central question of, do you think there should be guidelines?
Yeah.
And the overwhelming response is yes, but it could be interesting to look at how does that break down in terms of people who actually analyze the data versus those who don't, for example. So just kind of thinking about what we want to highlight with graphs in that way, and to have some kind of a list so I can just knock them off one by one. And it's no problem to do many more than we need and to choose from them. It's pretty straightforward. So just some kind of a list to work through rather than me deciding, oh, that's interesting, would be good.
I think that'd be a good focus for a good outcome for today, wouldn't it, for us to have some discussion about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the action, so welcome Daniel, we're just getting going with the discussion of the actions from the last meeting, so thanks for joining. Siwan, do you want to come in on any of that?
Yeah, I'm just wanted to see. Yes, I'm happy to check the coding and just pass the code to me and have a look. And give me a deadline.
Okay, but would it be worth, like, because I think it's still, the naming of the variables is still pretty, in-housey. I wonder if it would be worth just having a really brief intro with you, Siwan, so we can say how we've done it verbally. It might actually be quicker than trying to, write up some long explanation.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Yeah.
Is that okay with you, Daniel and Matt?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it shouldn't take
definitely.
long. But I think I wouldn't want anyone to go in there without a little bit of orientation first.
Yeah.
It's pretty large now.
Okay, so thanks the three of you for doing that, and thanks C1 for checking. Sounds like we're nearly ready for that bit, so that's great. There was an action about running the stats, but I get that that's just ongoing, really. We're not quite at that stage yet. Discussion.
Well, actually,
sorry,
I was just going to say, actually, the stats can be run just as easily as the graphs. It's really easy. It's going to be very straightforward to run them once we decide what we want to analyze.
Okay.
I mean, that's assuming that we don't have anything too complex, but I'm guessing these are going to be simple enough comparisons.
Yeah. There was an action about starting a limitations section because we had some discussion about multiple responses or multiple roles. So that has been started within the manuscript and hopefully clarified. But obviously people are very welcome to add comments to that if they feel that could be worded better. There was an action for Rasha relating to an agenda item for discussion at ISCET more broadly about data and data repository. So I think we were keen that that was taken back to ISCET. So that was file, data repository, file format, and kind of transparency of working for the future. Is that something that's been done, Rasha, or is that to be done in the future?
Well, I have a draft for the agenda, but we still don't have any timing, so we haven't actually started like informing. We can have I don't know if we can have like the agenda online for the coming meeting, and then we would say that that we still didn't decide the date. I don't know how it goes, but for now, what I understood is that the decision was to wait a little bit for the meeting, which I think we should. It's been a long time since we met, but yeah, Matt, go
I was going
on.
to say, if you send me the agenda as it currently stands, I can put that on the website and create a placeholder page for the next meeting, whenever that happens to be. But you're right, it has been a while since we had a general ISET meeting, and it might be nice for them to have an update because, of course, there's all the progress the Nystagmus committee are making as well. And so there's people inside these committees who won't know what's going on.
Yeah, and I have finalized the membership also. That's good news. I will post it on the on our forum. That's a side issue, so I won't take time in it. But I mean, I'll post it on the forum, and then that's also something. So we have a lot to discuss. So yeah, I will pass the agenda and we discuss it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Rasha. I'll mark that as complete as long as that's been kind of handed on for some broader discussion, just so that each of these different subgroups don't spend lots of time discussing the same thing. I think that's the point. So thank you for that. And then the last action was about the meeting recording going on the website. So thank you, Siwan and Matt, for that. I think that's been complete. So the main focus of today's meeting probably needs to be about the data and what we want to graph and analyze. I don't know whether Fiona, Matt, Daniel want to talk through any of their immediate queries or suggestions, or would you like me to just start a document? So do we want to work from the main manuscript, because there's several kind of comments and queries within that, or is it easier to have a separate list that we create together?
I would suggest we create a separate list, but let's go through the manuscript now and pull out those ones, delete those comments,
Okay.
different list, so we've got that in one place, and then we can think what we're missing from there, maybe.
Yeah, agreed. It would be great
Fine.
to have a separate list.
Word document okay, or do you prefer a little spreadsheet, or are you looking at spreadsheets now?
Whatever you like, doesn't matter.
Could it just be within the manuscript for now? Just because we're going to, obviously the results section will be those graphs, right? So if we have a list there, then we can.
Fine. Yep. Okay. So I was going to go here if this is all right with everybody, or is that going to mess things up?
I can't see where you're typing. Actually, I don't have the document open. Do you have the link for the?
Yeah.
Could we maybe do a shared screen? Might be.
So this is the start of the results section. And we've got some descriptive information. And then we've got our original kind of first draft of involvement data. So do you want it here at the beginning?
Gemma, didn't we do this? I feel like I did this last time after the last meeting. We created a list of questions, and then I went through and pulled out the question numbers.
So that's up here.
Yeah, we have it already.
So this is currently in the at the end of the introduction section. So these are each of our questions.
Yeah, and what I've put in that fourth column is the names of the columns that then Fiona will be pulling out into the stats package to generate the graphs.
Okay.
It might be that that's already a fairly complete list.
Should we just go through that? So we've got, so these have been formed from our original research questions. And from those, we wrote the survey. So we should have results to answer each of these. So our first one was about how our eye trackers used clinically. So who or which specialisation performs the eye tracking, the data analysis and the interpretation. So there's kind of several things within that. How frequently is eye tracking performed? Which systems are used? Which measures or data are used and by whom? How is the data processed, analysed and interpreted? And are there any limitations, barriers or concerns about eye tracking at present? And then the second question was more related to guidelines. What guidelines, if any, are used for eye tracking clinically? Where they exist, is there a desire or a need to change the existing guidelines? Where they don't exist, is there a desire or a need to develop them? And then there was a more open-ended question about any additional information that we thought would feed into the broader discussion. Fiona.
Yeah, I was just, so looking at each of these, it's each kind of responses. Are people envisaging just like bar plots of how many we're talking about in each case? And then in terms of the plots, some of the interesting questions would be answered by plots that contain multiple responses. So for example, do you analyze the data or not? Might be interesting to know when looking at, do you think there should be guidelines or not? So it's those kind of maybe interrelated sort of questions that would define a graph that should be produced. Because otherwise we just have a huge list of bar plots that just give the rate of responses. But I think it could be, I mean, definitely looking at the file, if we were to say there's probably differences in terms of who wants guidelines between those who analyze and those who don't, that, you know, there could be other questions that are interesting that could involve a number of variables, and that's sort of what I would like to see. So if you think it would be interesting to know, is there a difference between those who do and don't analyze data in terms of whether they want guidelines? That's one plot. Does it make sense?
I also, absolutely, I think it should be combined plots like you're discussing, but I also think it would be interesting to look at things like, there seems to be this sort of split between nystagmus for eye movement issues and then nystagmus for vestibular issues. And I think it would be really interesting to see if there's more awareness in one of those groups, because I'm suspecting with the ear stuff that there will be a bit more of a guideline and an awareness kind of aspect to that. As to whether or not they think things should be changed. So I think that would be a nice split to kind of look at those on
provided we, yeah, I agree, but it depends on how many responses we have in each, because if there's only a couple, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to analyze or graph it. You could just state like simply, but it wouldn't give you enough data in many cases to actually run a stat on it or to plot if there's very few. So that's kind of what I was getting at, that if we can figure out what do we want plots for, I can also just check as I go through whether or not it's it's viable based on the number of responses. But I think that when we get down into the different specialities, the numbers get very small.
That's why I was thinking to group them as sort of ear people and eye people. I don't think we can split them any further down than that. But I'm kind of wondering, and it is exactly that question of what does that data look like? So if we can graph them as we go along, I think that'd be really helpful, because I was wondering that when we got down to question 2 in terms of the what's it called? The guidelines, as to whether or not there were enough people sort of saying, actually, yes, I think the guidelines themselves are fine, or having suggestions in that space. So I'm really curious to kind of see what that looks like.
Matt?
Yeah, I'm just looking, I've got the graph up in front of me at the moment, and we've got categories for people who are in neurology, but that could be ophthalmic or it could be more vestibular. We've also got audiology, and then there's allied health scientists. What are the clinical scientists or allied health professionals other than that? And I think the questions didn't allow us to give that much detail on whether it was eye or ear, unfortunately. We do have orthoptists. We basically presuppose what some of these disciplines could be. So there's optometrists in there, orthoptists in there. I don't think we ever actually gave a specific category for ENT. So some people have said other and then written ENT, but it's going to be difficult. That's basically what I'm trying to make. It's not entirely clear.
Fiona?
We also have what kind of eye movement measures they're taking, whether it was fixation, saccade, smooth pursuit, nystagmus. And I think those answers might be more numerous. So that's a possible alternate way to look at it. And I suspect that it's going to be difficult to have like a clean cutoff between these different professions even, or different fields, because, balance disorders, for example, are often both vestibular and neurological. And we do have quite a number where they fit into more than one category based on free text responses. So in that sense, you know, we could plot the types of eye movements that are used. There's a lot of different ways to slice it up, and I think we're going to be limited by how much data we actually have in each of them, because some questions just weren't answered. You know, it's not like everyone who answered every question, and very often there isn't data in a lot of the lines.
Amanda, did you have something else to say it on that?
No, I was just thinking whether or not they could be split based on the type of trackers. It's sort of in that line of what are they measuring and what sort of trackers are they using, thinking about the systems that they could actually be looking at with that.
That could be an additional plot.
Yeah. But I think we need to group them. Sorry, go.
Yeah, because there's obviously some that are using more kind of vestibular, kind of head-mounted kind of trackers, aren't they? So that might infer a split by profession. But I think even if we state what we would have, I guess I'm thinking about repeating this in the future to kind of see what's changing following the implementation of or release of some kind of guidelines. And it would be probably helpful to state what analysis wasn't possible as much as what was, because I think that would essentially infer that we were interested to know this, but the results didn't allow us to answer this question or allow us to drill down into whether that was different for eye people and ear people, because that actually might tee up the future questions or the future structure of a survey. Fiona?
Yeah, I think that's definitely important to say what we could and couldn't analyse. But just when you were talking there, I was remembering that there is actually quite some splits within specializations that could be interesting. Like there was one, I think it was an ENT person who said that they don't use eye tracking at all because they have to do head maneuvers. And that's interesting because there are eye trackers that are really designed for VHIT with head maneuvers. So, you know, there's clearly, you know, a difference within specialization of what they consider to be barriers. And I expect that exactly that sort of difference is what might change over time, just because, you know, people are coming, you know, new systems are coming out, and maybe, you know, if you've been in your specialization a long time using some standard measures that were used before eye trackers came out, then, you know, maybe that's going to change as new people are coming into the profession. But just to point out that it doesn't split cleanly like that. There are big differences within specialization that are maybe worth highlighting.
I think that's it, isn't it? To say that the data wasn't as complete as we'd like, but there wasn't that clean split, kind of highlights that either some people are using eye trackers that aren't classically in their kind of discipline, so they're kind of using different pieces of equipment and doing different things, or maybe some people are kind of bridging clinical areas, because what I would imagine is if you're the one with an eye tracker in your unit and you're in an ear unit, but there's somebody who says, actually, I want my eye patient tested on you know, they might be asked to do things that kind of take them out of their kind of speciality. So I think we just present the data we can, but we just clearly state where that data is limited and what we can't do with it just as much as we can. I'm going back to some of the earlier discussion we had a couple of meetings ago that was us making notes during a meeting. Ideally present the data by clinical subgroup or speciality where possible. For example, ENT versus ophthalmology. Or do we list by professional group or list by eye tracker? Because we didn't ask exactly what they were doing with the eye tracker. So it does. So people haven't listed a list of kind of testing batteries. There is actually an assumption what they're doing with it. We just asked them to tell us what they were using. And we talked about head-mounted, tower-mounted, remote mount. And then we talked about kind of bar graphs to display the data and analysing, comparing groups where possible. But I think even a few months ago, we were aware that the data might be quite limited.
I think we talked about a lot of these being descriptive for exactly that. And I still think even looking like that, it looks like that holds.
Yeah.
I think it's just working out how to present those descriptive aspects, that's all. Because I do like that sort of combined grouping for some of them. I think that gives a little bit more than just here was that straight answer. So I like that suggestion.
Would it maybe be worth just start writing the list of plots as we go, even if they're not completely clear, we can sort of work towards clarity as we go. So maybe one plot would be looking at answering the question, who wants guidelines? And breaking that down in whatever number of ways. It could be specialization, it could be whether or not they actually analyze the data quantitatively versus qualitatively, looking at output. So that's maybe one question to answer with plots.
Yeah, I think if we try and follow these research questions as they're laid out, yeah, I think that kind of takes you through the data and kind of gets to what's everybody doing and do they want guidelines. I feel like following that order is probably the best place to start.
Right, but in terms of combining a number of variables like specialization with whether or not they want guidelines,
Yeah. I do think if the data allows us to drill down to that level, it would be helpful to see that.
Okay.
If we can.
So should we put that in as the first one then? So
in this table that Matt's created, we could probably add, there's a blank column here, isn't there? So for plots. So should we add that here? Where they exist, is there a need?
Do you have the link to hand, Gemma? So I know it's in an email somewhere, but
that's okay.
Share it. I'm also wondering, there might have been other things that were brought up in comments along the side, so I can kind of have a look through.
Yeah, so we're on page 10.
Oh, sorry, it's there. Okay, my chat window wasn't scrolled down. That's my fault. Got it.
Is it okay if I just temporarily make some notes underneath this table as we go?
Absolutely fine.
Okay. Okay.
I wonder if, I mean, essentially, that by specialty or whether or not they analyse, I think also is the case for other questions. So things like limitations or concerns about eye tracking at present, you know, is that speciality specific or is that based on what they actually do with the eye tracker or do with the data?
Could you say the first bit of that again? Sorry.
So where you've got that question, like plot 1, who wants the guidelines, speciality, whether or not they analyse, I think that's also the case for limitations, barriers or concerns. Amanda.
Just a thought while we're looking at this, one of the things that would have been nice to include if we are running this as a second one, it would actually be years of experience with clinical eye tracking, because I think that would kind of come into play as to how comfortable you were with not having or having a guideline as well.
You mean in terms of how many years or they've been using it, and how often?
Yeah. So we've got percentage of time, like how you're doing weekly, monthly, etc. But, you know, there's a big difference to I've been doing eye tracking for the last year or two to I've been doing eye tracking for the last 50 years. And here's all of the, you know, the stagnification seen and sub. So I think there's different levels of comfort within that would be useful next time.
I think we could maybe include that. I'll just pop it where the limitation section is for now, Amanda, because I think that's the limitation, what we weren't able to answer.
Yeah, wasn't there a question and that concluded that many people wanted actually like more info in the field or training or something like that? Wasn't that one of the conclusions of the survey? Because I remember we discussed that in one meeting. But I don't know which question reflected that. Now, let me have a look.
I think you can be in a field, though, for a long time and not necessarily be doing clinical eye tracking. So I think there is a split within that, if that makes sense. Like, there's definitely a lot of optoms, for example, that have never done eye tracking.
Yeah. I thought that there was a question that reflected something along that line, but I'm not sure. So I'll try to be sure first.
Okay. Is there any other things that you need discussion of relating to the presentation of the results?
I think it's just to have some ideas. I mean, that's potentially 3 plots we've covered. And I don't know if there's something else that's really core to the goals of the questionnaire that should be added there.
Are we going to have a plot for each of the questions, though? So where we've got
just for demographics, you mean? Like, just the count. We can do that.
Yeah. I think if it's better descriptively, that's fine. But if it's just easier to show it as a bar chart, I think that would probably display the data. Amanda?
I'm wondering, like, we've been talking about different professions, but what about our manufacturers? So thinking about that from that other kind of perspective as well, because that was the other big group that we were kind of targeting. Should we be having a graph to kind of show their thoughts on this process and putting that separate to the different professions?
Yeah, we can split the respondents in any number of ways because we've coded for that so that we can pull out separate groups or compare groups or remove them for some questions we want to ask. But yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Like, but I'm not sure of, like, from manufacturers, what would be interesting to know, for example.
And we did talk about this before, didn't we? That we would try and present all clinical people together, professional body people, and then manufacturer responses.
Yeah.
Yeah, and bearing in mind that some people belong to several categories there. But that's okay because we've coded so that that's not a problem.
Yeah. I think it's also a reflection of a small field, isn't it, where people may have numerous roles. So I think that's just describing the landscape, really.
Actually, looking at the way the data are coded, I don't think there are any overlaps between professional body, commercial facing role, and perform tracking.
If
They are nicely distinct, because remember when we asked them to complete the survey, we said you would complete it once per role, as it were.
Yeah, so that's it. If they had,
so that does that means
role,
I'm pretty
were
sure we
asked-
had clinicians who were also professional bodies.
okay.
Well, didn't we talk about this for which IP address they came from and decided that they weren't? Or is there a way to identify if it's the same person?
So we
think they
didn't
were-
have any duplicate responses.
Yeah.
And what we asked them to do, if they had a dual role, was to
do it
answer
twice.
it more than once and stating that role. So they had to pick the role that they most aligned to, and they were allowed to complete it again and state that second role. So we shouldn't have.
Yeah, it's question 4 is where we ask which role which capacity they're completing the survey under, but then when we go to question 37, we ask if they're clinically qualified, but they are still answering it under that guise as determined by question 4. So I think
I seem to remember a free text answer where there were some where it was clear they were both clinician and professional body.
okay.
But most of the professional body people will also be clinicians, because by nature, to be in that professional body, you've got to be that clinical.
Right.
You've got, to be in the GMC, you've got to be a doctor.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying maybe that's not the best basis to group if they belong to several categories. We could group manufacturer and clinician. And that as far as I remember, that would work out. But to go to the professional bodies one is problematic.
I think the reason that we had that in the first place was that they were answering based on their view of what their professional group were doing. So they weren't personally doing the eye tracking, but they were telling us what they believed their members were doing.
That's something we could put in as a comment, but for the purposes of running an analysis or a plot, we just need to have like a clear differentiation. It is possible to plot where you could have a plot that describes how many people are dual role as well, but I don't think there were very many that this, I don't know if you would have enough data, because it was really only, as far as I remember, and I'll have to check again, but I think it was really only the clinic and professional body that are conflated.
Yeah, and I think if they're representing a professional body, they will be clinical.
Yeah.
But they were answering it in the capacity of professional body. So I think we just have to acknowledge that they will be clinicians, but they weren't. I think their responses will probably say, because they were asked, so we had 9 professional body responses, didn't we?
Maybe if we could check that, like, I'm not sure if it was 9, but if it was 9, we could check of the people who said they were from a professional body, how many were clinicians versus something else. But then it's a question of, is that really worth plotting? You know,
Okay.
because probably you're going to see they're all clinicians and none of them are manufacturers.
Yeah, got
It's
you.
not, you know,
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the data now. The people that responded to say they were professional bodies I don't think they even got asked that question, actually. There's no responses in this, whether they were clinical or non-clinical. So I think we may well have just never asked them.
Sorry. Sorry, I thought there was a free text question somewhere where they could actually write about how they use eye tracking and that.
Okay, so I'm looking at, they didn't get asked the one question 37, which is, are you clinical or are you non-clinical? But maybe there is. It's a long document. I'm scrolling along it, but yeah, I don't know. I just filtered out the ones that said professional body, and I can say that they don't have question 37 asked, but I don't know beyond that. Anyway, it might become clearer as we start to put it together, you know, some of these things.
Yeah, but maybe a good place to continue is what groups might we like to, like what questions provide us with grouping that would be interesting to plot in terms of any other variables. So we have the professional, clinician, manufacturer grouping, which is not always mutually exclusive. But are there any other groups that are interesting to look at or compare?
I would suggest the actual clinical disciplines, because that informs where the guidance is lacking and for which professional types. So whether that's, you know, neurology and ophthalmology and so on.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at with plot 1. Yeah.
I also think having a plot with sort of amount of time or frequency that they're doing stuff, along with whether or not they think a guideline is needed or helpful. Because I think one of the discussion points that we should kind of come to is, yes, we may end up needing to write a guideline, but maybe we need additional training in some of these areas as well. And that might be, you know, attached to conferences, that might be training, like, I don't know where that sits, but that's sort of the thought process, is this probably won't be a standalone.
Yeah, I just checked. I think like around question 52, some people did answer. So not only they asked for guidelines, but also protocols and like different stuff that, and we concluded that actually we might need to do some like start with basic training and that. Yeah, but I think it's around these questions, maybe 52 and around that. So,
and there are some companies. No, keep going. Sorry.
But it's I'm not sure it's reflected in the analysis, because the question is only now about whether they wanted guidelines or not. If that's what I could find. So I mean, there was no mention. Is there another place where it mentioned the other, like qualitative analysis for what they mentioned?
I think there are a couple of free text options.
Yeah,
particularly at the end.
Yeah, that's the one I'm referring to. I at least I saw question 52.
And so what's your question, Rasha?
I was touching, because I had that same thought as Amanda, like we did conclude that people wanted from us more than guidelines. They wanted like more, and if we analyze this question, so we reached even the conclusion that we will do more like workshops and more as like more, not only the guidelines. I mean, it could reflect also that not all people have the great experience yet in working with eye tracking, so they want more of testing protocols and like we're speaking about a different level, like to put standards and guidelines for those who are already working in eye tracking. But the survey also revealed that there are many people who are starting in this field and needed other like sort of training from us. I mean, that's the impression that we all took and even have planned to action, but I'm not sure that this is reflected in the results currently.
I think just touching on that, one of the things that we haven't really gotten into is around what do we do with that open text sort of section of things. So one of the things I would love to see is what are the additional things that you want to that you think should have guidelines, not just should there be a guideline or not, but actually on what. And there's a big list there in terms of the free text that kind of comes through. That's sort of in 51. So I think it's delving into what do we do with some of these free text pieces and what comes out of that I think should also be added to this.
That question 51, we have been categorizing it into whether people wanted guidance on saccade protocols, pursuit protocols, nystagmus, neurological or gaze palsies.
Okay.
So we have done some attempts to categorize that. I think that it probably captures most of what's coming up, because people have used this box on 51 as a kind of to list conditions. I mean, it does say what scenarios, conditions, or eye movements do you think there should be guidelines for clinical eye tracking. So I'm hoping we can present those data.
But then 52, have a look on 52.
Oh, 52, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah, we haven't done any kind of categorization for that.
They're like, where would you go and what would you do? And I'm kind of aware that some of the companies are like, oh, come learn basic eye tracking, but they're very like, here is our eye tracker, and this is specific to some of that.
Yeah. And 52, we did have an action plan after it. Like we did, I remember, like we addressed that as one of the the quick outcomes of the early outcomes of the survey was actually these questions that they demanded more protocols and more testing in addition to the guidelines.
Yeah, the word test protocols seems to come up very, very often in that question 52 answers.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I would say protocols is probably answered on more than it's not included.
Sorry, but I think there was quite some disagreement also. Like you had strong opinions that there shouldn't be guidelines or protocols because they restrict medics in making the kind of decisions they're expert in making, to summarize. So I think it's often with this kind of survey-based data interesting to preserve the disagreement rather than always push for consensus, you know?
And that's where that clinical specialty split
that would be interesting to know.
And experience.
Right.
Yeah,
or
experience.
It may be an analyze and if you're interpreting the data, you actually want some freedom to do that.
Right, and that's why I'm suggesting this plot one, as I put it here, you know, who wants the guidelines by speciality and whether or not they analyze data, because I know that it's not going to split cleanly between speciality, because we definitely had someone who's doing head maneuvers saying, I never use eye trackers because I do head maneuvers. And I don't think there should be guidelines because it restricts clinicians, whereas others in other ENT departments only use eye tracking for things like VHIT tests and so on, which you can't do without an eye tracker. So I think that's interesting to preserve, potentially to show. And also thinking about the motivation behind this guideline, it's also maybe a good thing for clinicians to read and see, okay, not everyone agrees with me, even from my own specialization. And that's an interesting output, as opposed to saying, oh, well, this specialization thinks it's important and this one doesn't. And then you can just say, well, that's because different specializations have different needs and we don't need it in ours, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting, therefore, to look not just at counts, but these kind of more subtle explanations and descriptions of what's going on within specializations and between them. So yeah.
And so I think also some comments would reflect experience, because someone who like with the comment that you just mentioned, this is someone that already knows what he's doing with eye trackings. So I don't know even if we can say that how like such these comments. I think you won't find a lot saying that, okay, we don't need standards. We should it would be good also to say how many like mention that, but I would assume that the majority, at least from the first impression analysis, that the majority really wanted protocols and testing and wanted to learn more.
They wanted guidelines, but honestly, the dissenters who strongly felt there shouldn't be guidelines seemed
How many?
I think it was like 3 or 4 or something like this, not that many. But they gave quite verbose answers to the free text sections, and they seem to be some of the most experienced.
Yeah, so exactly. So I mean, it's linked. So I don't know why, but like
I guess because when they started, eye tracking wasn't really used. Whereas now clinicians starting in ENT, of course, they're going to learn about VHIT tests and so on, which are eye tracking based. So it may be, I don't want to use any ageist language. I think that's really important. Let's talk about experience levels. It's a shame we don't have a direct sort of measure of that, but it could be that, you know, people naturally want to stick to the methods they trained with and that they're used to, and it's as simple as that. And that also is kind of valid, because generally you'll be more skilled in the methods that you've been using for a long time, so you might get a better clinical outcome with those. So I'm not trying to say they just don't know you can use eye tracking for these things, but there are cases in there where people who seem to have quite some experience, and maybe they even are in professional bodies, that could be worth looking at, where they're saying, I do head movements, so eye tracking doesn't work. And that's simply not true, you know. And most groups are using eye tracking with head movements in vestibular clinics. So it's going to require some sort of, you know, a little bit sensitive handling to how we want to express these things, because obviously we don't want to say, oh, you know, the old crew are all anti-eye tracking, you know, or something like, you know, we don't want to leave anything that could be interpreted in that way. But I think it's still worth saying, as if you want to get people who are who don't think we should be using eye tracking with head movements to rethink, or to maybe go, okay, maybe there is a place for these guidelines, or maybe there is a need for some training, and I might even like to go to that. Then you know, explicating some of this could be nice in the paper, and that's kind of what I was trying to think of in terms of what do we plot and what can we say about it.
Matt, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just to say, I've pulled out, it was 3 respondents who said no, they didn't want guidelines, and I'm just pasting now in the chat the actual responses of those. The first one's the most verbose of those, and I think it reflects, I know of one clinician who's said to me that they worry that guidelines would be too restrictive. I think really what that does is speaks to how we should be cautious when we're developing the guidelines, to make sure that, you know, we are just describing basic processes and not making them, you know, say that this is how you eat, like a complete recipe book for how you see a patient from the moment they walk in the door. You know, ISCET scope is meant to be limited to simply, if you're going to do this kind of test, how many target jumps are you going to have, how big are they going to be, all that kind of stuff, without telling clinicians how to do their job. So I think this could be quite useful for the narrative of explaining how ISCET needs to be cautious.
I do think, I agree, and I think there's a way to present. I guess the question is about how do we present some of this qualitative data, and it sounds like we could say, whilst there is broad agreement on some of these things, not everybody totally agrees, and these are the reasons given for why not. and we could present those quotes or selections of those quotes to illustrate the concerns. So I guess what we're saying is we don't want to say everybody agrees this is a great idea just by kind of deleting, cherry picking the data.
Yeah, or even just reporting a percentage, because it is very tiny percentage, but even so, it's still valid.
Yeah, and in qualitative research, the deviant cases that say that one person that says something different is actually really valuable, because that one person, whilst it's a small n, it's a different point of view. So I think there's a way that we can write that in without discounting it or pushing it aside and categorizing that as age or experience, whatever. I think we can just report the data as accurately as we can to say there are different points of view. Rasha, did you want to say something?
I'm totally agreeing. And yeah, of course we need to report on that. However, this shouldn't discourage what we're doing, because also part of what we're doing is the need for having guidelines, because while even I was drafting for the membership and putting some references, there is no exact standards and guidelines for eye tracking. So yes, we might have some opposition but for guidelines, but I don't think that any field exists, especially dealing in clinical life, should be just running like that. So yes, we're not authoritative, but I think even in our hierarchy we are very much sticking to ethics and transparency and all this. So yes, some people would say that they want to go very innovative, but I'm sorry, all due respect, yes, we would report their opinion, but at least the majority gave us the green light to that there has to be guidelines, and I didn't find any standards for eye tracking. I had to say related technologies, and I mentioned the AI, because some eye trackers use AI and things like that. But I don't know, it shouldn't be that much of innovation in a field, because also eye tracking has its hazards and it can be used in surveillance and other stuff. So we have to have some guidelines out there.
Fiona.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just looking at, it was exactly that response that you've pulled out that was forefront in my mind, Matt. There's a number of things in this response. First of all, it's saying patients are different and have different levels of compliance, and you may have to, I had to smile when I saw Lee and Z mentioned, you might have to do something that isn't in Lee and Z, right? And I think our answer to that is, we don't say that you can't do that. That's not our purpose. And then it says, guidelines for eye tracking wouldn't prevent you doing whatever else you want as well, right? You don't have to use eye tracking just because there's guidelines for how to use it if you do use it. And the second part was, what really stuck out in my mind was this phrase, "it will be a slippery slope," which is quite dramatic kind of language, who prescribes how a test should or should not be carried out. So this seems to be a misunderstanding, because we're not actually saying, you should do eye tracking or you shouldn't, or who should do it and who shouldn't do it, or any of those things. So this seems to kind of express a fear that we're taking away clinicians' agency with guidelines, whereas maybe this points to the fact that, because I'm sure it is representative, it's more than just this respondent would think that way. It points to the fact that we should be very clear that we're saying, if you do use eye tracking or you want to, there should be some guidelines to help you figure out how best to analyze it or how best to carry out those tests, but not that you can't do it some other way if you don't want to. It's to help people have comparative results across tests and across test locations and across clinical publications or whatever else, but it's not prescriptive. Because the slippery slope, seems to be afraid that someone is going to come in and tell you what you should be doing in your clinic. And that's probably something that we should really make clear we're not trying to do.
Yes, Amanda.
I wonder if that comes into thinking about the medico-legal aspect, and perhaps if that's why some people have said with like protocols rather than guidelines as a sort of a theme that's coming through, because it like we're all coming from this from a training and this is where we want it to go, but maybe it's this is something that you could start with, and there are many maybe it's I think that's around being careful with the wording that's used and how that wording itself is interpreted, because I think for those of us who come into this, we're all coming into this with this is where we think it should be, but I think that's a really useful piece to kind of go, well, I'm thinking about that as a guideline, and the fact that we're held to guidelines that, say, Optometry Australia, for example, puts out, that's the standard that I would be held to in court. So that's where I think some of that concern might be coming from, and thinking about the legalities of having a guideline as opposed to a protocol, and just that kind of terminology.
Can I quickly just respond? So I'm just looking at the same response, and the third point they meant, the manufacturer of a certified medical device must take care of this, not the clinician. And I think that was in reference to, the quality of the data, or what kind of what should be present in the data for it to be considered valid. And it seems to be like trying to say the manufacturers have to decide, it's up to them to produce something that is good. But the reality of eye tracking is that you can't do that, because it really depends on the eyeball, and that's completely individual, and also on the light in the room and whether it's set up right, and all kinds of things that manufacturers have absolutely no control over. So that might be also a point to emphasize in the results and in the discussion, that the nature of eye tracking is that a big part of the setup is an unknown to manufacturers, and that is the eyeball and the lighting in the room and how the shape of their face, which influences where cameras are and all this kind of stuff. And that therefore it can't be just handed over to manufacturers to take care of that. There has to be some understanding of the factors that influence your data on behalf of the people recording it.
I'm wondering also whether the person responding to this, because the question was, do you think there should be guidelines? And they might have thought, oh, this is the manufacturer is supposed to provide an instruction manual for the use of their eye tracker. And if that was what they were thinking, then that's kind of missing the point of what ISCET is, which is to say that we want to standardize the kind of the protocol used by those by those machines, as opposed to providing an instruction manual on how to use an eye tracker. That's not what we're doing, right?
What was the original wording for this part 3? Because they've answered in 3 parts here.
Oh, sorry. These are 3 separate. Sorry, these are 3 separate responses. These are the responses please give the reason why you do not think there should be guidance, and these are the 3 people that said no.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So sorry, these are not the same person, but So the question for this was, why do you think there is not a need for clinical eye tracking guidelines? Which was a follow-up to anyone who said no to the question of where they do not currently exist. Do you think there is a need for guidelines for clinical eye tracking?
So would a good answer to this be to have some kind of description of what factors manufacturers can take care of and what they can't take care of because of the nature of eye tracking, and just different eyeballs will or won't match the internal eye model?
I'm not sure. I mean, I suppose we're looking at it's what is the purpose of these guidelines, and the guidelines have been more about, number of targets shown, duration to show a target for, how eccentric should targets move to, that sort of thing, as opposed to, an eye tracker could be set up in many different ways. It could be a search quote, and then the idea is these guidelines should be applicable to any eye tracker, so long as those are useful for interpreting data from that particular condition we're looking at. So I think again, maybe the person responding to this wasn't quite sure of what the scope would be of ISCET. I mean, why would they be?
But then so sorry to interrupt, sorry, but I'm just thinking that sort of is directly opposed then to the idea that we shouldn't be telling clinicians what to do. Because now this suggests that actually manufacturers should be deciding those things. And I'm not saying we should resolve this argument, but we should at least present these varying opinions, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm cautious of us assuming what people mean as well, or kind of adding a layer of interpretation. I think all we can do is state the words that they've used and acknowledge that because this isn't an interview or a focus group, you can't dig down and absolutely kind of clarify their meaning. So all we can do is present the words they've used.
Yeah, and here we have words to say, I would actually put the quotes in directly. Where one quote is about, don't tell clinicians what to do, we have to be creative. And then another quote wants to hand the whole thing over to manufacturers, which is definitely opposed opinions, because what we're proposing is a professional body would provide guidelines, but the clinician is free to ignore them if they want to, or not do eye tracking at all. We're not saying anything about that. We're saying, if you are going to do eye tracking, here's some helpful guidelines. Whereas those who are resistant to such a setup are either saying, don't tell me what to do in the clinic, or the manufacturers should do it. So there is an interesting, they might agree that there shouldn't be guidelines, but they're not agreeing with each other on why, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, Rasha, I'm aware of time here, so I guess we probably need to kind of wrap up a little bit, but is there something you want to add, Rasha?
Well, it's in the same point. Now, we have been taking the example of ISF. They're not authoritative, so they don't tell clinicians what to do. But because they have protocols, clinicians do. It's a reference for clinicians. So they say according to ISEF, So I think that at least my vision for our society, and it's nice to discuss maybe in next meetings, is that to do something like that. So yes, we're not authoritative, but we need to give reference, because there is no reference in eye tracking enough for people, So I'm not, at least me, I don't feel like I'm afraid that clinicians would fear that there are guidelines, because we can't, it's not obligatory, but after a while, maybe when we're like more older than this, it could become kind of this solid reference that people will say according to these guidelines. And then if people would go so much astray from these guidelines, then maybe which in a term that will bring more bad results or even harm patients, then at least we have provided guidelines. We can never enforce them, but that's my vision. I don't know if we all are on the same page or not on this.
Siwan.
Yeah, I'll just be quick. I think I don't feel that's a negative, because the three comments just tell us what good guidelines should look like. For example, they said the manufacturer certified medical device must take care of this. So we, as a guideline, maybe we can collaborate with manufacturers. Well, it depends on the purpose of pathology. So the guidelines we can, based on different pathology, and also the invention or innovation or something. So our guideline is based on basic thing. We don't limit people doing that or something. I think that just to tell us what the good guidelines should look like. So yeah.
Thanks. That's great. I think I certainly don't see these as limitations. I see them just as we need to include these. I think direct quotes would be very helpful. And we need to probably acknowledge some of the things that Siwan's just said. So I guess before we just wrap up, we've got some actions from today. So one thing that we've not mentioned, but I'm going to do, is double check all of the numbers of the responses that didn't provide the full consent statements and report those. They were typically people who didn't provide any information, but I'm going to definitely do that. Fiona is going to ask C1 to check the coding when that's ready. And then we've kind of talked through some of the stages of graphing and analysing the data. That's where we're up to. Is that okay with everybody, Matt? Yeah.
Before we send to C1, I'm going to send back to Fiona and Daniel because Fiona's created some comments which I want to just make sure that I've been through, and then I will send it to you two, and then maybe we can, between the three of us, make sure we sign off before it goes to C1, and we can give a copy to Gemma at that point as well, maybe, so it's cool.
Okay.
I'll do that after this meeting.
Great. Thanks, Matt.
Is there anything else anybody would like to add? C1.
So I had just one. I saw the table across a few pages. It's a really big table. So my alternative could be a tree-like figure. So just the tree branch to different questions, give the number of the responses, something like that. So whether it is worth thinking about consideration.
Sorry, we're turning what into a tree structure?
A tree structure, so that you have the first question goes to different professional and manufacturer. So go to two branches, the different number of responses. And for each one, you have this question. So the layer, just one layer, just could be the one question. So how many answered that question from professional, from manufacturer? So just kind of tree structure.
So is this a suggestion for how it would be graphed in the paper?
Yeah. Oh no. This is the overview of this data. So then later you use your bar speaker. That's also fine.
So the descriptive plots essentially.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. I just have a just one suggestion.
Fiona, is that something that you think is achievable with the stats package you're using?
I'm sorry, could you give me that once again? I've just got an emergency submission problem.
Yeah, I think I can show you the graph, like the tree structure to show the response to different branches.
Oh, you mean the contingency?
Oh, yeah, you mean the overview of what data look like.
Okay, I can imagine graphing contingency, like if you answer yes or no, you get these follow-up questions and so on.
Yes, just lead to different branches, different questions, or responses, or different groups. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be in the appendix or something. But I will also say that it's a bit of a mess. It's not going to strengthen the article to include it.
Okay.
So
yeah, I think because sometimes the wording was changed to adapt to the person completing it, they've had a slightly different wording of the same question, but it's not quite as neat as that.
Yeah, I guess once look at the general, like what kind of figure they use. Maybe this one is often used in engineering, so not for it's clinical. Yes.
So you this. Sorry, I think I finally worked out. This is about not the results, but it's just describing the method of it as a tree.
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, a lot of the times the variations of the questions were just to make them grammatically correct. That was all it was. So you can probably present those as. But yeah. Okay.
Okay. In terms of where we go from here, then, what do we think is sensible in terms of the length of time for this? Because I guess it sounds like we want to get to a stage where we've got kind of graphs to look at and presentation of data to look at and presentation of some of the quotes as well. to kind of work through the presentation of the results. What do we think is reasonable? I'm looking at Matt, Daniel, Fiona here.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to be doing a little bit on the table for now, and I recognise that Fiona's sort of down for a lot of the graph producing. But if there's any way we can split that, Fiona, what package are you using? Are you doing R or at JASP or SPSS?
It doesn't matter really. It could be or Python, whatever. It doesn't really matter. I mean, as I said, graphing and running analysis is super fast. It's really deciding what should be run that takes time. Okay, it's
fine. So if that isn't a burden on you, as long as we provide clear instruction as to what to produce, then maybe, yeah, I mean, I'll be sending this around to Daniel and Fiona again shortly. That'll then get one, and then there'll be however long that will take. And then Fiona will generate the first iteration of the graphs. And I guess then we should all look at those. Maybe that would be the time to meet. We can actually just look at the graphs that Fiona's produced. So, I mean, it could be another 2 weeks, it could be 3 weeks. I want to push people past, you know, people got other things going on. How long has it been? It's been less than a month, this last one, hasn't it? It's been only...
Yeah, it's come around pretty quick, actually.
Should we call it a month?
I'm just aware that people have, you know, like workload comments are common for us all, aren't they? So...
Well, January is usually worse than... You know, the start of term is usually pretty crazy, but it calms down once we've found, you know, timetables and things. I mean, I think it shouldn't take too long. The main thing is to schedule a meeting with CO1 ASAP, and I think maybe at the end of that meeting we would be clear on what to plot, and then we should be ready to share.
Okay. Would you like to pencil something in now, or is it better that you let us know once those are complete and we kind of go from there?
I'm thinking if I send... Sorry, Fiona, go on.
I was just going to say it's always good to pencil something in. You know, last minute meetings are not as well attended, but maybe put it at 3 weeks or a month, and then if it's finished earlier, it just means we have more time to discuss. Or think about it.
So 4 weeks takes us to the 24th of March.
That would be fine. And then, Stuan, would you be available in a week's time to meet at the same time with Daniel, Fiona, and I? So if I get this stuff... Go on, sorry.
Yeah, because in your time it's night at my time, so yeah, any time should be fine.
Okay, I could do earlier. Fiona and Daniel, what about you? Are you available in a week to meet maybe a little bit earlier than this?
So at this time?
Could you do an hour earlier at least, just to give Suan a bit more?
Yeah, I could do an hour earlier. If it's on Tuesday, I'm pretty flexible.
I haven't got my timetable for next week, basically, so I have literally no idea when I'm going to be free.
Well, should we put it in? And if you're not available, then don't worry. But if we have,
yeah.
Or Daniel, if you know, do you want to just let us know when you get your timetable? Because
it might be like the morning of the day before, so it's kind of
wow.
Not very nice to you, medics, are they?
No. But pencil it in, and I'll be there or I won't. I'll send you an email to let you know.
Suan, if we met an hour earlier than we have today, would that suit you?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
But Matt, are you confident that, because I think most of the comments in there were waiting for Daniel to confirm your...
So this is it. I will do mine. I'll go through the thing now and clear everything I can. I'll then send to Daniel, and then I guess if there's anything then that needs to go to Fiona, you send it to Fiona. I don't know. It depends on when Daniel's available. It sounds like there's going to be more for Daniel to check. But yeah, I'll get this to you this afternoon.
I'll have a look in the next couple of days and then send it back to you guys.
Yep.
Shall we pencil in Tuesday the 24th for a meeting for everybody? For us as a working group. Amanda and C1, is it easier if we do this at kind of an hour or so earlier? Is earlier better?
Not for me, because my daughter will still be awake.
Okay. C1?
Yeah. I'm flexible. Yeah, anytime at night it should be fine.
Okay. Fine. I will pencil that in and let you all know. We can push that back if needed.
All right,
Okay.
if you and Daniel want to see one, I will send you the calendar invite with the Teams. Does Teams work for everyone? For you three at least? Okay. We'll do that by email.
Okay. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.